So welcome again. We're going to pick up with the ACT English where we left off. I'm down in Florida now, so hopefully the video quality and audio quality is just as good. I am also doing the separate audio, so, hopefully everything is looking nice. But let's go ahead and take a look at the old ACT English here. So again, we're going to climb Mount Fuji today. So last time we talked a lot about the different, let's say, independent and non-independent pieces of a sentence, and whether to use a semicolon or a comma. That's one of the biggest things that are missed on the ACT. So just to repeat, if both sentences are something that are independent, that is, you can read each piece of the sentence as if it is its own independent sentence, you want to use a semicolon or a comma and or a period and capitalization. If one of the pieces of the sentence is not independent, you want to use a comma. I'm sure we will see some more of this throughout the test, if not on this passage. So let's look at climbing Mount Fuji. So again, general rule is just to read through it. Finish the sentence when you get to a prompt and then, see what's going on. Bundled up in wool sweaters and thick coats, and we watched the sun setting on Mount Fuji in Japan. So here there's that comma and that I was mentioning, but this is actually the wrong place to use it, right? Bundled up in wool sweaters and thick coats is not a complete sentence in and of itself. We watched the sun setting on Mount Fuji in Japan. That works. So we have a non-independent and an independent piece of the sentence, which means we want to see if we can use a comma, right? Coats while watching, coats watching, here we go, coats, comma, we watched. That's since you have the non-independent and the independent joined with a comma. It was August and our clothes were stifling, but we would have needed the warmth from our bodies sealed around us as we hiked into the high altitudes. Okay, would have needed is kind of strange here, right? This suggests that they don't need it, but they might have or something like that. It's this weird use of the subjunctive. So if we look at the options, there's a would need, so they're saying that in the future we'll need it, and that seems to be correct as they're climbing up in the altitudes. Will need is, again, seems like it's plausible, it's talking about the future. And then we need is also possible. So let's see, it was August, our clothes were stifling, but we need the warmth from our bodies sealed around us as we hiked in the warm altitudes. Okay. We will need the warmth from our bodies sealed around us as we hiked into the high altitudes. Okay, so here, this hiked tells you that it needs to be in the past tense, right? So need and will need is not going to work. Would need is going to be the one here. Three friends and I stepped away from the crowd of other hikers and spoke our intention. Sunset at the base, sunrise at the top. This A is something that'll come up later. It's basically put a sentence somewhere in this essay. The 1 and 2 paragraph numbers are the same sort of thing. They might ask us to rearrange the paragraphs, for example. As we hiked, a patchwork of clouds swept across the darkening sky, hiding all traces of our surroundings outside our flashlight's beams. The trail gradually changed from compact dirt to a jumble of volcanic rocks. We tried to steady ourselves with our walking sticks, but slipped and stumbled because of the jumble rocks we were slipping on. Okay. This might sound a little bit strange because I just said a jumble of volcanic rocks, and then we tried to steady ourselves, but there were jumbled rocks. So if you start hearing the same word a couple times in a passage, this probably means it's going to be redundancy. And indeed, if we look at the other options, even though we use our walking sticks, okay, they already talked about trying to steady themselves with the walking sticks. Despite any efforts to remain steady, again, they're saying that they're trying to remain steady. And then just with each step. So F, G, and H all gave redundant information. J is the one that we want to pick. Basically, if you hear repeated words, you just want to pick the shortest one. That's the rule of thumb. Every 1,000 feet, we came to a small station constructed of tin and cement, barely able to block the wind. At each one, we noted the roof piled high on fallen rocks and felt both unsettled and reassured by this evidence of the station's protective ability. Okay. So the question here is, what's the relationship to the roof and the rocks, right? So the roof can be piled high on fallen rocks, that is, the roof is on top of rocks, but that doesn't sound right because the roof should be on the small station, which is made of tin and cement. Piling high with, so this doesn't really make sense because, again, this is supposed to be past tense, so it should be piled high with, if anything. So that's the answer C. Then piling high on, again, it's not going to be D, so they're describing a roof that has a bunch of rocks on it, basically. It should be piled high with. We rested uneasily for a moment as a clerk burned the station brand into our walking sticks, which it was proof of our progress through the darkness. Okay, right? So this, I can barely read it because it barely makes sense. The "it was proof of our progress through the darkness" sounds like it wants to be a complete sentence, but the which should be a pronoun already, basically, right? This is like belt and suspenders sort of thing. The which and the it. So which was proof of our progress through the darkness might work, but it looks like we don't have that answer here. We rested on these as a cleric burned the station brand into our walking sticks. That's a complete sentence. It was proof of our progress through the darkness. That's a complete sentence. So we have independent and independent. That means they cannot be joined with this comma. Sticks proved our darkness. Again, we have two independent sentences. We need some sort of punctuation because otherwise it becomes a run-on. So it's got to be H. And again, that's joining an independent and a non-independent piece of a sentence with a comma. Totally kosher. As we neared the summit, the whole group of hikers, thinly spread across the mountain for most of the route, condensed, forming an illuminated line along the trail. So as we near the summit, the whole group of hikers, thinly spread across the mountain for most of the route. Okay. So the hikers are thinly spread across the mountain for a lot of the route, right? So for most of the route sounds plausible. For the most part of the route is just weird and clunky, right? For majority of the route, now if it said for the majority of the route, that might be fine, but it doesn't say that. This is kind of idiomatic English. This is just like the way people say stuff. For more of the route, if you're using more, you need a comparative. It's like for more of the route than this other group of people. So more can't be correct. There's got to be no change. So these hikers condensed. And as they condense, right, they form an illuminated line along the trail. So as we near the summit, the whole group of hikers condensed. This thinly spread across the mountain for most of the route, that's in a positive, meaning that we can kind of like imagine that we kind of extract this from the sentence. This is just a little bit of sentence diagramming, right? So really the key part of the sentence is the whole group of hikers condensed. That's independent. Forming an illuminated line along the trail is non-independent as it is right now, right? As I'm looking at this sentence, I notice that we have a comma here with no option to change the comma. Oh, I don't want to cover that up. Okay, please Control Z. Okay, there we go. So there's a comma there with no opportunity to change the comma. So that means that we need to have a formation where you have an independent and non-independent piece. So F is already starting to work. G would not work because that makes the second part of the sentence independent. Same with H, same with J. Okay, so they're playing the same trick on you, more or less, right? Our pace slowed. Progressing along the trail, we reached the summit just 5 minutes before dawn. Okay, grammatically this reads fine, but notice that this is a prompt, which means that there's something else that they're asking you to think about. Which choice emphasizes the slowness of the ascent? So we're thinking about slowness. It supports the idea that the narrator's group of friends did not set their own pace. So slowness, not setting their own pace. Progressing, nothing to do with slowness. Able to advance only a few steps at a time. That sounds really good, right? It says slow, and it talks about a limitation. Moving forward with each step, again, doesn't talk about slowness. Climbing higher in altitude doesn't talk about slowness. It's got to be B. Good. In the half-light of the rising sun, we began to make out the dark lines of the cliffs at the crater's edge. Okay, notice this is non-independent with no option to change it because we have this in. This preposition is going to make it non-independent. The second part has to be independent because you need at least one independent piece of a sentence in order to have a coherent sentence. So great, that means we need to split this prepositional phrase with this complete phrase. I'm going to look for a comma because that is the most common thing we do, and indeed there is that comma with H. The other ones will not work because the colon doesn't make sense. This isn't defining what the sun is or being in the light of the half sun. Semicolon doesn't work, dash doesn't work because we don't have another dash to balance it out, or it's not at the end of the sentence. We began to make out the dark lines of the cliffs at the crater's edge. Okay, notice that they're trying to mess with possessives here. So cliffs has this apostrophe, crater's edge has this apostrophe. So the question is, what is being possessed here? So the cliffs aren't owning anything, but the crater is owning its edge, right? This is the edge of the crater. But there is nothing of the cliffs here, right? It's just cliffs. So because of that, we don't need this apostrophe on the cliffs, but the craters with the apostrophe S, that's okay. So cliffs at the crater's edge. Since I think this is the first time we've talked about possessive, just a little bit of a review. Okay, so we're back after that little bit of a technical snafu. My computer sort of lost it. I'm using the little laptop, so I don't have the sheer horsepower of my desktop that I usually do. Anyways, as I said, possessives, not that bad. You need an apostrophe if you're using possessives. You always just add an apostrophe s, no matter what. But in the case of going from something like, cliffs to possessive cliffs, because I have an s apostrophe s, it's unpronounceable, so you just get rid of the s. That's kind of the way that I help to remember it, right? So then it just becomes cliffs with an s, and then just the apostrophe afterwards. Okay. We crouched down on jutting pieces of rock and waited for the shifting clouds to clear. We waited for the sun. If the writer were to delete the preceding sentence, preceding means coming before, we waited for the sun, the paragraph would primarily lose. Okay, so they were crouching, they were waiting for the clouds to clear, they're waiting for the sun. Okay, so a restatement of an idea that emphasizes the hiker's anticipation when they reach the summit sounds plausible. They're waiting, they're looking forward to it. Statement that introduces the idea of waiting. No, they just talked about waiting in the previous sentence before that. An unnecessary detail that contradicts information early in the paragraph. You can make an argument for being unnecessary, but it definitely doesn't contradict any information earlier in the paragraph. A clear image that conveys what the hikers saw when they reached the summit. No, this is something that they're waiting to see, not something that they're actually seeing in real life. Generally, a sudden gap in the clouds left us blinking. Okay. As the sunlight squelched out the severe landscape of gray volcanic rock. This is right now a very strange sentence. So generally a sudden gap in the cloud. So there's no general thing happening here. This is just a specific thing that's happening to them right now. That can't be that. Furthermore, this is not expanding on a gap opening in the clouds. Once again, this is the first time the gap's opening in the clouds, so it's got to be finally here. 28. Which choice most dramatically emphasizes the ruggedness of the landscape? Okay. So squelching doesn't have to do with ruggedness. It has to do with being kind of squishy. I don't know. Shattered over. Ruggedness. Sounds good. Smothered. Not necessarily rugged. You can get your hash browns from Waffle House scattered and smothered and covered, but they're not rugged hash browns. I have to call out to all my people from the South, I guess. Went over. Very generic. Nothing to do with ruggedness. It's got to be the shattered over. We leaned against each other, spent. Perhaps there is truth in the old Japanese saying, a wise man climbed Mount Fuji, but only a fool climbs it twice. Okay. Questions 29 and 30 ask about the preceding passage as a whole. The writer wants to add the following sentence to the essay. We clipped small flashlights onto our coats, picked up our walking sticks, and started up the trail with the other hikers as the sun dipped below the trees. Okay. This sun dipping below the trees is really key to figuring out where to place this. This is saying that it must be happening around sunset. So if you remember early on in the passage, they're like, okay, sunset at the base, sunrise at the top. So that suggests this should go kind of early. So let's look at A in paragraph 1 and B in paragraph 2. So paragraph 1, as we scroll all the way up here. Okay. Sunset at the base, sunrise at the top, and then they clip their flashlights on. That's a maybe, right? As we hiked, the past vertical clouds swept across the darkening sky. The trail changed from compact dirt to a jumble of volcanic rocks. We tried to steady ourselves with our rocking sticks. Okay. This already seems a little bit too late, right? So in the first paragraph, they were already watching the sun setting, and they're kind of getting prepped. They're like, we're going to put in our heavy clothes. So it makes sense to pick up their walking sticks and clip on their flashlights at this point. So I'm pretty sure that's going to end up being A, just right there in paragraph 1. Good. And then question 30, suppose the writer's primary purpose had been to describe the experience of doing something difficult. Will this essay accomplish this purpose? Okay, you can argue yes or no here, but AC Data doesn't really care about your opinion, right? You really want to look at the justification that comes after the yeses and the nos. This is also true for the science section. So yes, because it tells about a variety of challenges the hikers faced along their journey. I mean, maybe, right? They definitely are like, okay, we're climbing up things, we're climbing up rocks, we're looking at getting to the top, right? Yes, because it focuses primarily on the hiker's need for walking sticks and other tools to make it up the trail. I wouldn't say that's quite right. They're really focusing on the effort itself, and then they're sitting and waiting for the sun. It's really exciting, right? No, because it focuses on the rewarding nature of the experience, but does not describe the hike as challenging. Okay, this is one of those answers that has two pieces, right? Focuses on the rewarding nature of the experience, I think is plausible, but does not describe the hike as challenging, I think is just wrong. It's definitely challenging, right? They're trying to walk, they're falling over rocks. It's like, you know, they're worried about getting killed by a landslide and all this. I'm exaggerating a little bit, but still. No, because it focuses mainly on the beauty of the surrounding landscape. Okay, so this is the other kind of plausible one. They definitely talk about it being, you know, beautiful, the sun shattering over the rocks and all that. But let's see what they're saying, you know. How much of it is talking about beauty? How much of it is talking about effort, right? In the first paragraph, they talk about, okay, they've got all these clothes on, they're getting their gear, you know, they're hiking, there's a patchwork of cloud, which sounds nice. They're slipping and stumbling. Every 1,000 feet they go to the place. They're resting uneasily. Nearing the summit, there's a whole bunch of hikers, and they can't go as quickly. There's some rising sun. They crouch and they wait, and then they're leaning against each other, spent as the sunlight's coming over. So I would say that the primary purpose is going to talk a lot about the challenges, right? They don't really talk about the surrounding landscape so much, just mentioning that the sky changes as they go through. So I think it's got to be F in this case, and that's going to clear up the Mount Fuji. All right. Well, I hope that this one was useful for you guys. Again, I'm on the Florida time down here and Central Time, so I'm going to double check whether this video is of sufficient quality. Hopefully it is, and if so, I'll crank out a bunch more of these, and you'll probably get all the English at one big block of content. So again, keep at it, keep chasing that 36, and stay savvy.